Basically, what you're to do is that as we ask the questions, all the candidates are going to be asking the same questions. The candidates, of course, Senator LeMieux is being so kind and patient, but he's here right now. And then as the candidates come this afternoon, then you'll just go through and mark down what your impression of their answer on these particular questions were. And then we will compile just simply a math thing this week sometime, and release the findings, the results. So, but the key is, folks, turn them in at the door when you leave, okay? Turn them back in so that they can collect them. I was just going to mention to you that, of course, there's some, I hope you don't walk away today and, oh, darn, I wish they'd asked about this or asked about that. There's only limited time, and we don't have time to ask about, there's so many critical issues, of course, so we hope that you'll simply see a reflection of the philosophy. Cameras are fine, but no videos. We have a videographer, and we're going to be posting the videos, and we will be passing the hat for donations, so whoever's got the hat, let her go. So we want to ask you for a donation to help with some of the expenses today. All right, let's move right on. And Senator George LeMieux. The rules is that you're going to be, and I've just reviewed this, and I may have to review it at each time, that you'll come up to the podium and you'll have 10 minutes. We have a timer down here in the person of Pete Franco. And Pete, you want to ring the bell?
You won't have to do.
Okay, we have a bell, and so it's a 10-minute opening. Actually, the bell is meant to keep us on track. We use the bell at our meetings, and it is the funnest, fun way to kind of keep on track. And so it's better than saying, "Will you please be quiet" or whatever. So I can say other, But anyway, Pete. So Pete, he has got a stopwatch, and we're going to do 10 minutes here, and then you'll move over there. And I will pose the questions to you, and you have 90 seconds or less. If you want to take less, that's appreciated. 90 seconds or less to answer the questions. And then we'll go on to the next question. And then at the end, then you're welcome to leave. Okay? So thank you very much for participating, and I hope you'll feel that it was well worth your time. And I'm going to introduce Senator LeMieux. He served as Florida's Deputy Attorney General, Chief of Staff to Florida's Governor, and most recently as United States Senator. As Deputy Attorney General, LeMieux had led an agency of more than 400 attorneys. LeMieux oversaw the Office of Governor for the administration's first year as Chief of Staff and helped oversee and manage Florida state agencies. While serving as Florida's 34th United States Senator, George was an active member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Commerce Committee, and the Special Committee on Aging. Senator LeMieux saw several of his legislative priorities signed into law, including Medicare anti-fraud legislation and an Export Promotion Act. During his time in the Senate, George introduced a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution and a proposal called the 2007 Solution, which would have reduced government spending to 2007 levels. Furthermore, he opposed wasteful, earmarked spending, which earned him a 93% rating from the National Taxpayers Union. At the conclusion of his Senate term in 2011, George returned to the Gunster Law Firm, where he currently serves as chairman of the board. He lives in Broward County with his wife Mikey and their 4 children. Senator LeMieux.
Well, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, Barb, thank you. Thanks to all of you for sharing some time with me on a Sunday. There's a lot of other things that you could be doing in this world, and the fact that you are here and that you are fighting for the future of this country is gratifying to me. I also want to say thank you for what you've done over the past couple of years. The Tea Party movement, the 9/12 movement has been extraordinarily important for this country because you have reminded Americans, you have reminded Republicans of our values, of our core values, of where this country started, that we are a country of laws, not men, that we are a country that is grounded on a constitution that says that the rights of the people come from God, and that government is formed to protect those rights, and that those powers are enumerated specifically, and that the federal government is supposed to be small and limited. Too many in Washington forgot this. Too many are still forgetting it. And what you're doing to remind Americans, remind your elected officials of where we came from and our founding document and what we believe in is extremely important for the future of this country. I had the great privilege of representing you in the United States Senate for 16 months. I was in private life when I was picked. I went from running a business to 2 weeks later, packing up my family, moving them to Washington, D.C., and being sworn in on the floor of the United States Senate by the Vice President. It was an extraordinarily quick transition that led me into an extraordinary time. And I want you to know, and I'm going to say some things here today that are critical of the government, but besides that criticism, it was the privilege of my life to represent you. To represent 18.5 million Floridians in what is still the world's greatest deliberative body was an extraordinary honor for me. When I first got there, I realized what a difficult situation the United States and Florida was in, the situation we're still in today. At that time, fighting 2 wars at the same time, now 3, recovering from the worst financial meltdown since the Great Depression, and fighting our way through the worst recession in Florida in 70 years. 10.5% unemployment, the worst mortgage foreclosure crisis in the country. 24% of all foreclosed properties in America are in Florida. This is a very difficult time for our people. It is not lost on me every day that working families, mom and dad, making about $50,000 a year, a lot of them, mom or dad, has lost their job. They may be working 2 or 3 jobs now, not making as much as they did when they had one good job. They're behind on their mortgage. They may not even be paying their mortgage. It's an extraordinarily difficult time. And amidst all this, we have a federal government that is out of control, that is rung amok, that is too big, too large, and too intrusive in our lives. As much of a privilege as it was for me to represent you in Washington, it is the most bizarre and broken and dysfunctional institution I've ever been affiliated with. And that was something that I always suspected, but I never knew how bad it was. When I first got there, one of the first things that I was asked to vote on was an appropriations bill to spend your money. And I think it was on housing and urban development. Not bad things, but the bill was 10-15% more than it was last year. So I asked, what are we cutting 10 or 15% to make up for it? And they gave me that look, like you're the new kid. Because they don't cut. In fact, they don't even budget. You might have heard that we haven't had a budget in more than, say, 770 days, the longest time in modern history that your Congress has failed to pass a budget, its foremost and fundamental obligation. You should know this. They never have a budget. Not in the way that you and I think of a budget. Because they don't look at what we take in when they determine what we spend. They look at what we spent last year and they add to it. And that is why we are $14.6 trillion in debt. We are headed to $26 trillion in debt by the end of the decade, and that's not accounting the obligations in Social Security and Medicare that gets us to 60 or 70 trillion. It is absolutely unsustainable. Absolutely unsustainable. We talk about these numbers, trillions and billions. It's hard to understand what they mean. It's not just a different letter in front of illion. $1 trillion is 1,000 billion. A billion is 1,000 million. If you were to spend $1 million a day from the birth of Jesus Christ to today, you would not get to $1 trillion. It is an extraordinary amount of money, and your government goes more than $1 trillion in deficit each and every year. This year it's $1.5 trillion. Next year it's $1.65. It took this country 200 years to go $1 trillion in debt. And now each and every year it goes $1 trillion in deficit. Our interest payment alone is $200 billion. And this is why this is critical. This is why this is the time we must do something about it. We've been spending too much money in government for 40 years. But like with anyone who spends too much money, there's a day of reckoning. There's a day when the check comes due. That day is coming because of the size of the interest payment. It is $200 billion a year. Next year it is $260. By the end of the decade it is $900. It's cascading out of control. Your government can't make a $900 billion interest payment. And long before that day that happens this decade, The world financial markets will figure out that we can't make our interest payment, and what's happening in Greece and Ireland and Portugal and Spain will happen here if we do not do something about it. When your members of Congress talk about cutting $38 billion from the federal budget, it's Mickey Mouse. Realize we're going in debt $4 billion a day. You're talking about 10 days worth of spending. If I were in the United States Congress now, I would absolutely not vote to raise the debt ceiling unless they cut trillions of dollars in spending. We need to cap federal spending and say, Congress, thou shalt not spend more than this amount. I offered legislation called the 2007 solution. You can read more about it at our website, georgeforflorida.com. If we would simply go back to what we spent 3.5 years ago and capped federal spending, this is across the board, not just discretionary, which is only 15% of the budget, everything. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, all federal spending. Cap it at what we spent in 2007. If we did that, we balanced the budget in 2 years, and we cut the national debt in half. It wouldn't be 14 on the way to 26. By the end of the decade, it'd be 7. And we would save America. I think that's a plan Americans could get behind. Were we so austere in our spending 3.5 years ago? Can't we go back as a country and say we'll live off of what we had when the economy was good, when tax revenues were high? You know, the Ryan plan, which I would have voted for if I were there, it's not a perfect plan, but it's better than nothing. It doesn't get to balancing the budget quick enough. It cuts $6 trillion. That's a great first step. It's a principled move. We can quibble about how to do it. But realize they go from 14 to 20 instead of 26. That's not enough. We can't afford a $20 trillion debt. We've got to be serious about this. And we've got to ask ourselves as a people, are we willing to do what we must to save this country? Or will we be the first generation of Americans that leave our children worse off? Will our children live in a diminished America? Shame on us if that happens. Every generation of Americans has come forward and sacrificed. Every generation of Americans has confronted the challenge of their time. This is the challenge of our time, our overspending. And the overspending, this financial crisis, is a product of a moral crisis. A crisis where our federal government believes that it is better than us. Where it believes we, the people, can't figure things out for ourselves. Where it supplants the federal government for the local community, the local church, the local city. Government is supposed to be best when it's closest to the people. This is the government around you here in your local cities and towns that are supposed to be involved most in your life, not the federal government. That's why our founders set forth a limited constitution in Article 1, Section 8 that enumerates the powers of Congress and says, this is what Congress should do, this is what Congress won't do, and the rest go back to the states and people. At the basis of this financial crisis is a moral crisis. And we've got to do better. I'm running for the U.S. Senate because I care about the future of this country. Frankly, it would be easier for me with 4 little kids, 8, 5, 3, and 1, and a good job, and people still call me senator. It'd be easier for me to stay home. Why am I doing it? I'm doing it because I want to save America from its government. And now I hear the bell. God bless you and thank you very much.
Now to the questions. And again, we have 90 seconds or less. You can take less time. Number 1 question. Will you pledge to fully repeal Obamacare?
Yes. I voted against it. When I first got there is when Obamacare came up. We spent 23 straight days in the United States Senate fighting against Obamacare. And I believe with your help, that's what led to what we were able to accomplish in 2010 because the people woke up. 23 straight days in a row was the longest continuous session of the U.S. Senate since the Senate decided whether or not to go to war during World War I. And shortly thereafter, Scott Brown was elected in Massachusetts, which gives me hope for my county of Broward, that we can elect a Republican anywhere. So yes, I will vote to repeal it. It is killing jobs. It's killing jobs in Florida.